Hello and welcome to the Rise Up with Orriant podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again to continue the conversation that we actually started last November with our Orriant book club. For those of you that may have read the book in the meantime, Atomic Habits by James Clear, or maybe you're still on the edge on whether or not you want to pick up this book or adopt some of the principles. So I do want to rejoin or re-welcome, if you will, our three Orriant health coaches and management staff, Jenny, Shell, and Chandra. Thank you, ladies, for joining us again this month.
Thanks for letting us come back.
Yes, excited to continue this conversation. I know there's some things that really resonated with me and made me kind of take a step back and look at some different habits that I want or maybe that I'm struggling with. So I'm really excited to continue this momentum that we have. And Shell, I'm going to pass the mic over to you to get the conversation restarted about atomic habits.
Yes, I'm ready. We're ready. We're so excited to have this conversation today. So just as a bit of an overview about our last podcast was to lay the groundwork for today's conversation. So we've really focused on a mindset shift or a new way of looking at habits, which is one of the objectives of the book. So we talked about identity-based habits. We talked about getting curious about habits that we already have, especially those that we are proud of and maybe can learn from and get some confidence about just our capacity to create good habits in our lives going forward, or maybe we want to break some bad habits. We talked about focusing on systems once we have a goal in mind, that most of our energy, 90 to 95% of our energy, should then be channeled to the system that will get us to the outcomes that we're seeking. And maybe most importantly, as the title of the book suggests, we talked about the concept of the aggregation of marginal gains. So looking for those small things that we can do repeatedly to have really great and powerful outcomes in our lives. And so that was kind of an overview of our conversation. Maybe we can link it in the show notes, or you can go back to the show and find the episode if you missed that one. So today we're diving into what author James Clear calls the backbone of the book, which is the 4 laws of behavior change. And I know when I hear that kind of sounds intimidating, but really they're 4 simple steps that will help us to create better habits or maybe break those diehard bad habits that we don't want to bring forward with us any longer. So the 4 laws are make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And each one of the 4 laws corresponds to a feedback loop, which is just an unconscious process that our mind goes through to wire habits. And so once we understand the feedback loop, which some of you might recognize as cue, craving, response, and reward, then we can hack our habits, so to speak, and create and have more control over the habits that we're creating or breaking.
Yes, love it.
Yeah, perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and dive in, just starting with the first law. But before I do that, the only extra thing that I would add to Shell's wonderful introduction is that as we're talking about these habits, we can also invert them or go opposite if you're trying to break a bad habit. So a lot of us have habits that we're trying to get rid of. And so a lot of this we're talking about in context of creating new habits, but you can just reverse the process and use that same concept in reverse to help you break a habit that you're trying to get rid of too. Okay, so the first law that we are going to talk about is to make it obvious. James Clear actually breaks it down, and he has several different subpoints that he goes into, but just for time, we're not going to get into every single one, but we are going to touch on a couple that we felt were most important. And so I'm going to start off with one of them, which is to use implementation intentions. Basically what that means is to to have a plan is the simple way of putting it. So he gives us an example of a study that they did about an exercise group. They were just, got a group of people together. They wanted to see who was going to be most successful at getting some exercise in. And they had three groups, a control group, and then they had a second group that got a presentation about, motivating yourself to be exercise, and then they just let them loose. And then the third group, they also got the presentation about motivation. And then they did one extra simple thing, was that they made a plan of action. So they said, I will exercise at a time in this location. And then they let them loose. And at the end of the study, they found out that the group, the third group, who had the motivational presentation as well as the plan of action, had 91% success at their exercise plan, whereas the first two groups were about 35 to 38%. Which is really interesting to note that even the second group who got that motivational presentation was about the same as the control group who had nothing. So, we can talk to you all you want about being motivated, and this is why exercise is good for you. But if you don't have a concrete plan for yourself, then it's going to be really hard to stick with it. And I love a quote that James Clear had in his book. He said, most people think they lack motivation, and what they really lack is clarity, meaning they don't have a plan, right? You say, oh, I want to exercise this week, and I just need to move more, and I need to get it done. And then life happens. It's hard to make that actually happen. But if you say, I'm going to exercise on Monday and Wednesday this week, then you're more likely to have that happen. Which I have someone who I coach, and that is exactly what she did this past month when we chatted. She said, I'm going to write in my calendar, and I'm going to say Monday and Wednesday are my days. And she wrote it down, and she had it scheduled in her calendar that those were the days she was going to exercise. And when we came together the next month, she found that she'd been successful simply for that purpose, that she had just planned ahead of it and made it the expectation and planned it into part of her day.
I love it. Knowledge isn't all the power we need, it sounds like. You can collect all the information and motivation from the outside, but you got to dig in to make a plan out of it.
I'm so glad you brought up coaching, Chandra, because as you're talking about making a plan, I'm like, that's what we do. That's what coaches do. They help you make that plan.
Yeah,
Every single session, you're leaving with an action plan.
exactly.
Yeah. Shell, do you want to talk about habit stacking?
Yeah. So this is a concept that I believe was conceptualized by BJ Fogg, Dr. BJ Fogg, another behavior change expert. He is the author of the book Tiny Habits, which maybe we'll explore at some point. But habit stacking is basically where you take a habit that maybe we'll call it an anchor habit, something very well established that you already do every day, and then you add a new habit to that established habit. So the formula would sound something like, after I fill in the blank, then or I will fill in the blank. And I believe that if you go to James Clear's website, under resources, he has what he calls these habit stacking recipe cards. So you can actually have a visual if that's helpful. So an example of that would be, so I think one that's given in the book is that that the author decided that after he closed his laptop to go to lunch for the day, he would do a certain amount of push-ups. And that example was one that I really liked, because he started with something less concrete when he was trying to create this like pre-lunch push-up habit. He started with just saying, when I leave my office for lunch, I will do push-ups. But he realized that it wasn't happening, because does that mean like when I what if I'm working somewhere else, or just, and there were just some unknowns there. So he realized that the anchor habit needed to be when he closed his laptop, that was the cue to get the push-ups in.
I'd add into that, and I'm sorry for everyone listening. I'm losing I'm losing my voice. I usually sound like this. But when you're thinking of those strong anchors that you're talking about, Shell, I just want to add in briefly, there's a few things that you want to consider when you're thinking of an anchor. So closing the laptop is such a good one because it's something that he's doing very reliably and consistently throughout his day. And so that's something to consider. Is like if you're thinking of this habit stacking concept of like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this, you don't want to do something that's either unpredictable or inconsistent. You want something that's really reliable and predictable so that you can start developing those routines. And you also want something that's precise. And so an example, I think it's easier to say what's not precise. So if you're like after dinner or whenever I feel stressed, not quite as effective as if you're like immediately after I place my dinner plate in the sink or after I have a meeting with my supervisor. Not that I have stress after meeting with my supervisor,
Never.
Tara.
Never.
But these are just a couple of things that will really help make those anchors really strong anchors, as if they're consistent and if they're precise. And so it's an example of like, I will go put on my workout clothes after I get home from work, might work for some people, but it's a little bit fuzzy and it can be stronger. And it's not quite as strong as like, I will go put on my workout clothes after I hang up my purse. Like I walk in the door, I hang up my purse, workout clothes. So when you're able to like really break it down to that atomic level, it just becomes a lot more concrete and stronger, and your likelihood of success is going to increase as well.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna keep moving us right along because we have so many things to cover, but I feel like that does feed so well into our next point. We are still talking about the first law of make it obvious. And the last thing we're going to hit in this one is to talk about designing your environment, which is Jenny was giving us such good examples of that, right? Like, if you're talking about, hey, you're going to put on your exercise clothes after you hang up your purse. Where are the exercise clothes? Do you have to go dig them out of your drawer? Do you have to go like all the way upstairs to your room or wherever it is, right? Like if you're going to make that really obvious and easy for you to habit stack, then you need to have them right there next to your purse, and you set them up the day, before you even leave for work for the day. You're like, I have my whole outfit, my shoes, my water bottle, everything is set up right here next to my purse, so I can hang up my purse and I can immediately change. And that's an example of just setting up your environment for success. James Clear talks about how your environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. And this is so true. He demonstrates this through another study. I love these examples because they just illustrate the point so well, I think. But he mentioned a study about a hospital cafeteria, and he had a researcher who wanted to just see if she could influence the amount of water people drank. And they didn't do any sort of initiative. They didn't tell anybody they were doing this. They simply changed where the water was. They made it more accessible throughout the cafeteria. They made the soda only available in like one of the coolers. They put water by the checkout stand. They had them at all the drink locations. They only had soda available at one drink location. And that's all they did. They didn't tell anybody about it. They just simply made the water more available. They didn't even change the price. Like they didn't make it cheaper or they just made it everywhere. And at the end of their study, the soda sales had dropped by 11% and water sales had increased by 25%, right? And this is, nobody even knows they did this. It just, by having it available to them and more accessible, they drink more water. And I think this is just something so key as we are thinking about our own behaviors, as we're thinking about, why am I making the decisions that I'm making? And we think we're aware and we think we're conscious of it, but a lot of times it just is what's around us, right? And what's easiest or most obvious in this case. So I love his thought that you don't have to be a victim of your environment. You can be the architect of it. And I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to read this little quote from him because he just says everything better than I ever do. Okay, he says, if you are overweight, a smoker, or an addict, you've been told your entire life that is because you lack self-control. The idea that a little bit of discipline would solve all our problems is deeply embedded in our culture. Recent research, however, shows something different. When scientists analyze people who appear to have tremendous self-control, it turns out that those individuals aren't all that different from those who are struggling. Instead, disciplined people are better at structuring their lives in a way that does not require heroic willpower and self-control. In other words, they spend less time in tempting situations. And I think the most obvious example of that is if you have, a plate of cookies on the counter, that's going to be really easy to grab a cookie when you walk past, right? If you take those cookies away or you replace it with some fruit or something else that you want to be eating, all of a sudden that just becomes a lot easier for you. You're not battling, should I eat a cookie? Shouldn't I? Like it's always in your face. You're looking at it all the time, right? You take that away and all of a sudden it's just not even it's not even there anymore. It's not a temptation.
Mm-hmm. I think about grocery stores. Grocery stores are really kind of the wizards of this. You know, they put the things in places that you know you will see, like the end cap. You know, again,
Yeah.
they're not discounting the price. They just want you to buy it. So they're going to make it even more obvious. Same thing with like the cereal aisle. You know, they're putting all of the cereals right at eye level that they want you to buy versus up here or down here. And then the problem is there's a snowball effect, right? So now you're buying the sugary cereal that got your attention because visual environment, and then it's home, and guess what? Now it's still in your vision. So then the snowball effect of that impulse buy gotcha, and now it's at home and it's in front of your face at all times. Thank you, grocery stores.
I think that's such a good point to recognize, though, is that there's so much research to support that you're like the influence that your environment has on
It's
you.
huge.
We as
Mm-hmm.
like behavior changers look at that and we think of like, oh, how can we manipulate our environment to work for us? Marketers, advertisers, all of these people that are participating in capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
they're using that same research and being like, oh, great, this is how we can use it against them.
Mm-hmm.
You actively have these forces working against you. Being able to like recognize that makes it a little bit easier. And then also just taking control of the environment that you do have control over can make that a lot easier.
I'm
Very loud
holding up my cell
phone for
phone
those
to
who
those
can't
that are
see.
listening. Those that are just listening, the cell phone is listening to us at all times. We know this. So again, talk about the marketing. It's going to peg you full of the things that you're talking and or thinking about. So tricky. Be careful.
So a recent participant example or client, Orriant client example of using this concept that I thought was really awesome. Someone I work with had, of necessity, had to move her weights to like a more open space near her living room, kind of close to where her treadmill was or her elliptical trainer. And when the room that she previously had her weight set in became available again, she had thought about moving the weights back, but she realized, like, in the meantime, she was using her weights so much more often because she
Mm-hmm.
could just see them readily.
Mm-hmm.
And they were close to a TV, they were close to where she was already doing her cardio. So she gave herself really high marks for strength training during our last conversation and credited that to just having her weights readily accessible.
I love it.
And I feel like making it obvious pairs or flows really well into the second law, which is making it
Mm-hmm.
attractive, where we were just talking about your environment and the influence that your environment has on you. Making it attractive, a big part of that law that it talks about is kind of the social aspect that James Clear mentions a lot of being able to join a group or a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. If you're struggling to, or if drinking alcohol is something that you don't want to be doing anymore, and all of your friends are drinking alcohol, your outings as a group or friendships is always surrounded going to bars, like that's going to be almost
Mm-hmm.
impossible. Whereas when you're aligning the people that you associate with with the behaviors that you want to be associating with. So you're spending more time with people who don't drink, or you're managing your environment to be in places where alcohol isn't around. It makes it a lot easier to engage in that behavior. We want to fit in. We're trying to be able to imitate other people and the people that we're around. And so I feel like that's a really easy flow into our second law of making it attractive. And I'm losing my voice again. If
Yeah.
Yeah.
help me out.
I'll jump in here. So, just kind of going along with joining a culture where your desired behavior is the norm. Um, I love this because maybe just like a different example of how this could work. So Jenny used the example of like, if you're with people who are doing what you don't want to do, your chances to stop doing that thing you don't want to do are minimal, and vice versa. If you're with people who are doing what you want to do, your chances of succeeding and becoming more consistent in that desired behavior skyrocket.
Yeah.
And I think probably with my background, I got in the fitness industry as a group fitness instructor back in the day. And it continues to be a passion for me, group fitness. And so I love that culture as an example of, especially if you've tried the exercise buddy thing or exercise partner thing, and it just adds that one more hard part of working out, because not only do you have your own schedule to figure out, you've got to coordinate with someone else. Whereas if you can join a group, one of my clients is part of a running club and they run at specific times on specific days. She does group fitness classes as cross training, and you know when to show up. Speaking of implementation intentions, right? So this example kind of couples a lot of these um, of the things that we're talking about. So that would be one example of joining a culture where your desired behavior is the norm. And all you have to do is show up at the day and time. Maybe there's a financial component to that as well. So I know that's a consideration, but that does make it easier and more attractive when you know that what you're wanting to do, you've got this instant support system for it.
Yeah, I'd love to tag team on that as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical culture as well. I'll bring up Peloton as kind of a prime big world example, is that they've created this whole community from, different groups and hashtags, and they do habit stacking. So it's one of those where they're kind of, tag teaming on both the laws that you just talked about to create a virtual community, to really reinforce that. You're showing up for small groups that are on there and the big Peloton community, and you can tell that I'm part of it.
Yes.
And this, I feel like talking about fitness is one of our go-to examples, not only because it's part of a community that we're all a part of, but it's also an easy example. This really exceeds when, like, we're talking about actual behavior change. We're not just talking about what you're eating and how you're moving your body. Like, if you appeal to a certain parenting style, like joining a group of parents who parent similarly to you. Maybe you don't believe in screen time for your kids or whatever. So you join a group of parents that their kids meet up at the park or they engage in different activities. Whether it's, maybe you want to change your behavior with your relationships. And so you can start support groups. You can go to therapy. Like, there's ways that you can, whatever your behavior is, if it's financial, if it's with your job, if it's with your parenting relationships, what have you, these are still applicable beyond what I would call kind of easier examples of physical health, which we tend to gravitate towards.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Jenny. I was thinking the same thing. Like we always we do tend to talk about fitness, but there are so many other ways this is applicable to you, depending on what you want to be, the type of human you want to be, and the type of habits that you're looking at, right? Like if you want to be a reader, then join a book group, right? If you want to be the type of person that doesn't talk bad about your spouse, then don't hang out with people who just badmouth their spouse the whole time that you're out at lunch or dinner or whatever, right? Like this is way more universal than just fitness schools. So I'm glad you said that.
Can I pick up on something you said really quick, Chandra? I love that you just said, if you want to be the type of person who like XYZ, Because so often I feel like we get lost in kind of identity politics of I have to be a reader. I have to maybe like read an X amount of books before I can consider myself a reader. And then I am qualified or worthy or whatever to join this community. I love what you said of if you want, you just have the desire to be this kind of person. This is how you actually make behavior change. You just want to make a behavior change. You have the motivation to. And so you start making it easy on yourself to make these behavior changes by joining communities, by changing your environment. And then I will just transition right by making it easy on yourself. That's the third law is make it easy to make those changes that you want. You don't have to like encompass or embody this ideology or this behavior before in order to do all of this.
So agree with that. Yeah, let's jump into the third law. So we've talked about the first law is make it obvious. The second, make it attractive. The third is to make it easy.
Yes,
Um,
please.
Yes. How do we make it easy, right? Sometimes you're like, well, of course I would, not to go back to our exercise habit again, but you know, we'd all love to exercise, but it's hard, right? You got to do the time and then you got to, you know, it's work to go and exercise. But so how can you make it easy? Is to reduce the friction that it takes. So if we're going to talk about the fitness example, if you have your plan is to go to the gym on Monday at 5 p.m. after work. You've got your implementation intention in place. You've made your plan. How the difference between having that plan and then making it easy, if you have the plan, but then you've got to go home, you've got to change, you've got to go back to the gym. There's a lot of steps in between, right? So maybe in this case, to make it easy, you're like, I'm going to pack a bag. I'm going to take it with me, right? It's going to be on the way. I'm going to change gyms and make the gym right next to my office, or that's right on the way home that I don't have to go 20 minutes in the opposite direction to get to, right? This is all kind of going back to all of the other things we've talked about is designing that environment in a way that's going to make it easiest on you. And so that's just takes some work, right? There's a thing, like if you want to have like a healthy breakfast, you got to sit down and think about like, what do I need to make a healthy breakfast? Do I need to like set out all the things ahead of time? Am I going to meal prep for the week the night before? Like, what can I do? What planning can I put in place in order to make the least amount of friction between the desired behavior that I want and just my normal life. So I don't know if you guys have any other examples of just ways to make things easy.
I'll give a personal example just from what you were describing, Chandra, because I used to be the person who would like you had at the gym that I would attend, you had to stay up until midnight because midnight is when childcare signups happen. So if you didn't stay up till midnight in order to sign up for childcare, like you were done. There was not an hour early enough that you could get up in order to schedule childcare. So I'd
Wow.
stay up till midnight, I'd make my reservations, I'd do all this work, I'd drive to the gym, I'd drop my kids off, go through all these things. This was over 2 hours in order to get in maybe like a 45-minute workout. After my third kid, who was born in 2020, so there was a pandemic happening at the time as well. It just was not going to happen though. Um, I work out in my pajamas now. I get out of bed. I like get my kids, like start getting them ready for school, get their stuff. I don't put on workout clothes anymore. I'm wearing pajama bottoms and a tank top, throw my hair up. Have my stuff set up in my room. That is like as easy as I can humanly make it. I'm not changing.
Mhm.
I can immediately take off sweaty pajamas and go jump in the shower. Like I want as little few steps and barriers as humanly possible. I don't need
Mhm.
to
I
look
love that.
cute. I just,
I love it. That's perfect.
just don't want that.
I'm going to give a personal example, not having to do with fitness since we keep going back to that, but I have this past year been wanting to read more. And um, I'm like, I don't know what book I want to read. I'm like, you have to go to the library. I got to get it all figured up. And so to make it easy for me, I have a list of books that I want to read. I have them queued up, and sometimes I do audiobooks. Sometimes I like to read a physical book. And that's been something I've been especially focused on is physical books at night instead of scrolling on my phone, because Tara, sleep is important and I want to get off the phone before I go to bed. So I've been trying to change my habit from scrolling the phone into reading a book before I go to sleep. And the biggest thing I've done, aside from just prepping the books, is I have it on my bed. Like I put it on my actual pillow so that it's there and it's ready for me at nighttime, and it makes it so easy to climb into bed. It's so cozy. It's this nice environment. I can read for 20 minutes before I go to bed every single night. And, I don't have to read hours to get through a book, but 15-20 minutes every night, and you get through a lot of pages that way.
Yeah,
Which actually, unless you guys have something else to add, I just want to talk about the 2-minute rule, which is the other point I really wanted to hit with make it easy. So the 2-minute rule is to downscale your habits until they can be done in 2 minutes or less. So a lot of times this happens a lot when we're coaching people, is they come in hot. They want to make all the changes. They're like, I am raring to go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I've got all these big ideas, which I love. I love that energy when they come in like that. But that can be really overwhelming sometimes. And so if you want to make a habit, to scale it down and make it way less intimidating. So for example, with the reading thing, if you're like, I want to pick up reading, but like, gosh, it just sounds so overwhelming to like read a whole chapter every night. Like, I don't know if I want to commit to that. Read 1 page, right? You scale that down to where it gets to a level that feels easy. And I actually just talked to someone else about this with exercise this week, is he is wanting to exercise more. And he's like, I am just maxed out. Like, I work all day, I come home, I have my son, like I don't know, all these other demands on my time. And I'm just not that excited about going out for a workout in the afternoon or evening when I get home from work. And we talked about this, scaling it down. And I said, how easy would it be, to just walk to the end of the street and back, right? Like what would that look like for you? How long do you think that would take? And we talked about that, and he's like, I think I could do that. Actually, I think I could get into the habit of coming home, lacing up my shoes, going to the end of the block and back takes less than 5 minutes. And then that's it. Right. And so, and maybe when you think about that, you're like, what's that even going to do for you? Like, what's 5 minutes of exercise going to do? But the idea is that you are creating this cue for yourself, and you're setting up this easy gateway habit where it becomes all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, I walked for 5 minutes. Like, I think I could do 5 more, right? And you're already out and you're already doing it. And you have the momentum going. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to bring up, I kind of roll into this, make it easy on myself whenever I look at a recipe. And Orriant really tries to do this as well. I mean, there is nothing more daunting to me than like trying to cook something healthy at home when it is like pages and pages of ingredients and steps. So again, I know I always roll into this, making it easy on myself when I'm looking at a recipe and I know that I can actually do it. It isn't 25 different ingredients, it is something that is attainable. And maybe I could do it in 2 minutes or 15 minutes. Again, I mean, it just makes it really tangible. So again, I kind of roll into this with nutrition, which is not something that we've talked a whole bunch about, but this is one for me that, choosing the recipes that are easy, that, get ready for this, are going to be satisfying when I actually eat it.
Yes.
Oh, the fourth
Joy.
law. Did anyone else have anything to add about the 2-minute rule, or should we move on to the fourth law?
Yeah, I actually do have something to add on this point. So, and I'm hoping for some more feedback, because I think that it's worth considering that for some people, the idea of scaling a desired habit down to 2 minutes, even if it's more doable and it's easy and it's more accessible, you're reducing the friction, you can overcome the inertia of not doing it, they don't believe it's going to be effective. And
Yes.
so it's
Thank
really, really
you.
hard to actually talk yourself into maybe leveling down to something that feels like it's not going to be effective. So I would love, Chandra, Tara, Jenny, how would you coach someone through that, kind of mental block of this isn't going to work?
Mm-hmm.
think this goes back into what we talked a lot about within the first episode. So I feel like if you haven't listened to that first episode, go back because we spent 45 minutes talking about it. Um, but you need to buy into this idea. So many people, again, exercise is such an easy topic, so I'm just going to use that as an example. So many people are sold on this idea that if you can't exercise for 45 minutes at least 5 days a week, then what is the point? You're like, what's the point of walking to the end of my street and back? Yeah, I can do it, but it doesn't do anything for me. And so being able to adjust your mindset into this idea that you are building something, that you're not
Mm-hmm.
just like throwing all the books on a shelf that hasn't been built, right? Like you are building a bookshelf and then you can add the books onto it afterwards is going to be critical. You don't start with the outcome, you start with the system. And so that's that's a mentality and it's a mindset that it's hard for people to get on board with. If you can talk them into seeing a few small successes early on, it's usually a lot easier. Being like, just try it for me.
Mm-hmm.
See how you feel, see what comes
Mm-hmm.
out of it. Like when you start setting them aside the time, when you start adjusting your mindset, when you start adjusting your your social outings, who you're socializing with, when you start adjusting your environment, it becomes so much easier to do more. But when you don't have those systems in place, the outcomes that you're looking for of eventually getting to that maybe 45 minutes, 5 days a week
Mm-hmm.
is so hard. And
Oh,
so it's really about buying into this idea of you're creating a system. That's actually the job. The job isn't doing the outcome and the final result that we're looking for. Your job is creating a system that's going to lead to a pattern of behavior that will ultimately lead to long-term success.
yep.
Yes, preach, Jenny. I love it. We talked a lot about that in the last one, right? Is the system is what you're going for. And as long as your system is working, then you can be satisfied, right? You don't have to be having the best workout of the day and
Mm-hmm.
feeling like $1 million to be like, hey, I'm doing what I want to do. As long as you're showing up, even if it's only 10 minutes some days, as long as you're reading that one page at night, as long as you are, you have the system set up to grocery shop and that you're trying to get healthy foods into your house, you can be satisfied and happy that your
Mm-hmm.
system is working.
Yes.
Yep.
And you can always fall back to the smallest part of your system, like the functional unit of your system. Whereas if you're this is so often why New Year's resolutions aren't very effective, is because you go in with this mentality of, I'm going to quit drinking soda this entire year, not going to do it at all. So what happens? You drink soda one time and your mentality goes, oh, guess it doesn't matter anymore. I drank it that one
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yep.
Whereas when you're creating a system of by the end of the year, December 31st, I don't want to be drinking soda by then you start evaluating where you are now and being like, okay, how much soda do I actually consume? I don't even know if I know. Be like, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to start paying attention to it. That's what I'm going to start with. Now I know how much I am. Now I'm going to just try and like decrease it a little bit. Maybe I drink the exact same number of cups, but I put more ice into it. And so my volume is actually going down. Then maybe I start cutting out 1 can at a time. Then maybe I start doing this, like maybe I start increasing water and I start adding water in between drinking soda. So by the end of the year, you've achieved your goal rather than starting at the beginning and you've got this mindset of all or nothing of saying, oh, I didn't do it, I failed. So now nothing else that I do matters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All
We'll talk
right. What? Yeah, I was going to say, well, what is next? I think Chandra and myself
Yeah.
launched into this
Yes.
with the words satisfaction and satisfying.
You gotta like what you're doing.
Oh, please. Yes, enjoy the soda. Take the 2 minutes and, enjoy only 2 minutes.
You gotta want what you're doing. And there's a lot of things that James Clear talks about in this book that we'll touch on really quick though. Chandra and Shell have heard me talk about this a ton, so I won't beat a dead horse with a stake over it. But there's something that I call the shoulds, which is this idea that you should be doing something, whether that's because You see other people doing it, whether that's because other people tell you that you should be doing it. And we get that as all the time as coaches, being like, well, I should be doing this, or I should do this. My wife tells me I should do this. My husband tells me I should do this. My kids want me to do this. I don't care what other people are telling you that you should be doing. I care about what you want to be doing. You're going to do what you want to do. So let's make sure that like our values and our goals are aligned. So we're doing what you really want. Because if we're trying to make changes for other people, they're not going to last long. So for the love, please like focus on what you want to be doing. Focus on something that's going to be fun.
Mhm.
Going to this idea of exercise that we're always talking about, the number of times that I hear exercise being introduced is this idea of a punishment. Like,
Mhm.
well, I have to exercise so I can earn this, or I have to exercise so I don't like, so my body doesn't do this. How about we pick a form of movement that you look forward to, that you're excited about? Do you want to go salsa dancing? Let's go salsa dancing. That's exercise. Do we like walking the dog? Fantastic. Let's walk the dog. Like, why are we trying to force ourselves into doing something that we don't actually really want to do? I'm
I
done with my
just
thought
had
now.
the most enjoyable conversation yesterday with someone that I coach about this actually. And he and his wife have really enjoyed experimenting with different recipes and just learning how to make homemade bread and homemade yogurt. And I don't know, every time I talk to them, they've tried some new thing, and they always in the spring and summer they like to get like a um one of those sharing boxes where you can get vegetables. What are those called? Like a
Like the
food sharing
co-ops.
box. Yeah,
Yeah,
co-op
Mhm.
thing, right? And he's always like, oh, and I'd never tried this vegetable before, but we've looked up some recipe and we tried it and it was so great. And then he said something that I loved and it stuck with me. And he said, you know, everybody just has it in their mind that eating healthy has to be a a pain, like a drudgery. And he's like, it's really not. It's actually really fun and it's enjoyable to try new things and to try new foods. And they kind of enjoy the challenge of like fitting different vegetables in their diet they've never tried before, or yeah, the thrill of learning how to make your own homemade yogurt, whatever it is, right? And I think it's just such a great example of how they have made this health journey that they're on this satisfying thing for them. It's become their hobby that they actually enjoy. And too often we think of food in particular as I can't eat that. I have to cut all these things out. This is not, you know, I shouldn't be eating that. I shouldn't be doing this, right? And really instead think of it as an opportunity to find something enjoyable. Like maybe you're gonna learn about a new recipe you'd never tried before and that it's so delicious and now is on you know, repeat at your house.
And I love what you said, that that was something that was really satisfying for them. Like it's not like you're saying everybody should learn how to make bread from scratch and everybody should learn how to make yogurt from scratch. That's something that they enjoyed. They liked learning something new. They liked the challenge of getting a basket of random vegetables and top chefing it in the kitchen, where they're like, great, what do I do with bok choy? I've never used this before. But that doesn't mean that that works for everybody. So like being able to use these laws on an individual level of like, what makes this obvious for you? What makes this attractive for you, easy for you, satisfying for you? Plug into that, because that's what's going to help you actually be successful. And it sounds like that's exactly what your uh, clients that you were just talking about were really exceptional at.
Yeah, something that I always remind myself of is two things. What shoes am I wearing and where are my shoes right now? Not the physical act of that, but again, they're my shoes. They're not the shoes that Jenny's wearing or Shell is wearing. Like they're my shoes. So I'm fitting in my shoes. And where are they right now? They're like current. They're underneath me. They're not 10 years down the road and they're not 5 years backwards. It's like living currently. Where am I? Where am I now? And what shoes am I wearing? So a little bit of a metaphor that way that I always remind myself of is where are you right now? And it's me. It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of part of that, there's some sort of like intrinsic rewards that can come from engaging in a behavior that you really like and enjoy and look forward to. And there's extrinsic rewards that you can give yourself too. If that helps you motivate yourself, then tap into that too. Something that I do, again, I'm going from bed and pajamas to exercising because I'm making it as easy as humanly possible to myself. I reward myself with my favorite protein shake afterwards. It's something that I love. I get to sit and I get to drink my favorite protein shake. I get to take a shower with my audiobook playing in the background. And that's my reward of like, this feels perfect right now. And so just being able to give yourself some sort of reward. For me, it's a protein shake when I finish working out. For you, it's probably something different. Um, but it just kind of helps reinforce that habit as well of being like, this is something fun, like this is something that I'm enjoying. Whether that's like, again, intrinsic, where you're just tapping into that part of yourself that feels deeply satisfied of acting in a way that your values are aligned with, or whether you actually physically give yourself some sort of reward to reinforce that you like doing that thing
And to keep doing it.
and to keep doing it, do it again.
Yeah, this is the law of behavior change that corresponds with the reward aspect of a feedback loop. And we know that that is what actually seals the deal, right? If behavior is rewarding, then we're going to repeat it. So this is the part of the loop that actually keeps that habit wired in, the reward.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, who's a journalist for the New York Times, and best-selling author now. But he goes through that habit loop of cue, routine, and reward and talks about how the golden rule is that you need to keep the cue and the reward the same and then change the habit. So often people go through this idea of like, oh, my habit that I want to get rid of is eating ice cream before bed. So instead I'm going to have carrot sticks. Like, is the reward of eating the carrot sticks and the ice cream the same? If not, you are probably not going to stick with that very long. And so being able to have some sort of like find out what's like truly driving you, what's rewarding you, what's like giving you those endorphins, the dopamine, the serotonin, all of those like feel good hormones, finding out what's really causing that, and then being able to find a really realistic um, behavior to substitute it with that you can look forward to, that is getting you closer to whatever your goals are or whatever your desires are, is going to be key with that.
Awesome. Final thoughts, ladies, as we have kind of gone through the 4 different laws. Final thoughts on how we can kind of really, I don't know, close with some oomph and some motivation for people to get out there and try the Atomic Habit way.
I'll go first. I actually have 2 final thoughts from the book. Well, first of all, read the book. It's so good. And very motivating to read and help build your skills. But my first thought is that James Clear says, how long does it take to build a new habit is the wrong question. And he really, well, I'll just say what he says you should say is, how many times do I need to do it, right? Sometimes we're like, how long is this going to take? Like, how, whatever. But it's really, when we're talking about habits, it really is about frequency, which I think reinforces that whole like 2-minute rule that we were talking about, where you're like, this isn't even doing anything for me. But scaling it down makes it more doable to have like the frequency that you need in order to really get that cemented in your brain wiring. So that, and then my second thought was that we've talked about a lot of things, and I guess I just wanted to say that not every tip is going to work for every person. And I like to think of it as more of like a toolbox, right? Where, maybe this idea really resonates with you and something else doesn't. And it's okay if the one thing that really works for somebody else doesn't work for you. And there are just a plethora of ideas, and just use it as some ideas to try, right? And you can figure out what works for you and what doesn't. If something isn't working, then that doesn't mean you failed. It just means they're like, let's go at this a different angle and try from another side.
I love the
Love
idea
it.
of looking at it like an experiment and a learning opportunity rather than pass
Yeah.
fail mentality.
Mm-hmm. And to look for help and reach out for help. Again, we're not on this earth alone. There's so many people like our Orriant health coaches that are there to help and to help you overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. My final thought is just not being afraid to start small. It's the title of the book, it's the thesis behind it. Start small. Small, tiny changes aggregate to the big, impressive, explosive outcomes that people are strongly motivated by and look forward to the most. But if we try to start there, then we can't maintain it or sustain it for very long periods of time more often. And so being able to start small, creating those systems for yourself, using these laws, making it easy, making it obvious, making it satisfying, because you're going to learn from that. Like Chandra was saying, you're going to learn what works for you and what you don't. And so you're going to find these systems that work for you and then ultimately lead to those really big changes that you're looking for.
Yeah, I agree. I think the book is about the power of patterns and making time work in our favor, even if we're doing really small things consistently over a long period of time is going to make all the difference. There's a theory called the coasting effect, right? And there's no long-term coasting effect when it comes to positive habits. So kind of going back to what Chandra said, like when we want to know how long is it going to take to create this habit, I've heard the author James Clear say in a podcast once that the true answer is forever, because you actually you have to do the behavior for as long as you want the outcomes. So I think that that's for me one of the take home points too, is you kind of have to let the idea of time become immaterial and just decide on the patterns that and behaviors that you want to make up your life and the quality of your life.
Love it. You guys are awesome. So as Chandra said, go out and read the book if you haven't already, or maybe reread it. Again, this is not one for me. I know it's not a one-time read either. There's so many good things that you may miss the first time around. So pick it up again if you haven't, or give it a listen again. Chandra, Shell, Jenny, thank you so much for bringing more content around this book, more insights. And I love how you all made it applicable to your own lives as well. You know, none of us are, experts each and every day. So I appreciate all of that. For all of our listeners, circle back next month. Believe it or not, next month is Sleep Awareness Month, Awareness Week. So many of our different initiatives next month are going to be focused around sleep. So I hope you will join us then for some more sleep tips. Thanks for
Sarah's a
joining.
sleep expert, so
Thank
listen
you.
to her. Thanks, Tara.
Have a good day.